So, in preparing for this episode, obviously I have a bunch of the Star Wars stuff here beside me. You'd think I was some kind of super fan, but thinking back on this, I was like, when did I first see this movie? And I do not remember when I first seen it.
Is that right?
I knew I seen it as a kid. I didn't see it in the theater though, but I remember liking it. I remember eating the C-3PO's cereal. I remember cartoons and video games, and I also remember that every year I would watch the Ewoks movie that they would show on, I guess it was ABC every year. Ewoks and Clash of the Titans would come on.
Oh, hopefully not the Ewoks Thanksgiving. Oh, that no,
No,
the
no,
Ewoks
no.
was something different.
Yeah,
Yes,
cause yeah, you're talking about the Christmas special.
Star Wars
Yeah.
Holiday Special. Yes.
Yeah, no, these are the Ewoks. But I don't think this, I remember, like I said, I remember liking it. I don't think it had a really big impact on me until they released the full trilogy on VHS in like 95.
Hmm.
And my friend got it and we watched it. And it just, I guess, that reinvigorated that feeling I had as watching. But I don't remember it being that effective me as a kid. Like I said, I can't remember the first time I seen it. But I do love it.
Well, you're a much younger guy than me,
Yeah.
and so probably in your case, and I think this is true of a lot of folks. Uh, this was sort of fit to them almost like Santa Claus or Mickey Mouse. It was part of their environment as they were growing up. So it's not like me. I was there the first weekend when it opened
Yeah.
at the Astor Plaza, and I even have I have program that I purchased on that day. And I was such a fan because it was such a life-changing experience for me that there was nothing else to buy really. I mean, there was the paperback book which I
Right.
bought. I went I just out of desperation to buy something else that was Star Wars related. I noticed that they had a little thing down at the bottom where you could order more. You know, they say send your quarters,
Yeah.
I'll send you one. So I bought another one. Had it mailed to me. And this one actually is interesting. They did different runs of the program. So this is printed on different paper and it has different
Okay.
colored paper inside. So now I have the original and I have the pink or
The
I think
pink
they
one.
call it the salmon
Right.
salmon colored one. But yeah, I remember after Return of the Jedi, there was a period there where the flame had gone out in the galaxy
Yeah.
of the Star Wars phenomenon, and there were a lot. I was some of my friends were having children, and their children were like 4 or 5 years old, and they didn't know anything about Star Wars. So I was the guy that was sort of introducing this to the kids, and when they saw it, of course, they just went crazy. This must have been happening a lot because
Yeah.
suddenly George Lucas got the idea to start making sequels. I guess the toy line was so lucrative that he said, well, if we're going to keep the toy line going, we have to have more movies. But I still remember seeing the first trailer when it ran on television late at night, fairly late at night. I think it was after 11 o'clock. I was watching some horror movie on Channel 9 here in New York, local station, and they ran the trailer, and I was just like, oh my God. It was like Jesus had shown up.
Yeah.
Now here's a word from Jesus. That was my reaction. It was just incredible. And I thought to myself, this is what me and my brother both would always run off anytime they were running a science fiction movie. We'd run off and we'd always be disappointed.
Yeah.
Like the previous science fiction movie that we went to see before Star Wars was Logan's Run. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
Jenny August was the best part of that movie.
that's right. Yes. Well, I mean, those type of movies, they usually coasted on the fact that they had attractive leads or they
Yeah.
had expensive sets and costumes and things like that, but they were shitty. But going and seeing Star Wars was like a revelation because it was for the first time we were seeing all these things that we wanted to do what I wanted to do myself in movies, and all the things that we sort of hoped other movies would be like. There it was on the screen.
Yeah.
So, and it was just tremendous. And the fact that there were so many good aspects to it. It wasn't as if you could say, well, the special effects were good, but the acting and
Yeah.
the story, everything was
Everything
uniform.
was good. Yeah.
Yeah. The music, special effects, the cinematography. I just was reading Gilbert Taylor, the cinematographer of Star Wars. He was also the cinematographer of The Omen and Frenzy, two films that we were fairly recently talking about. but he also did A Hard Day's Night, Doctor Strangelove, Dracula, the 79 version that you expressed a preference for, and the rather poor Flash Gordon
Yeah.
Dino De Laurentiis stick. That's quite a career, right? I mean, most people would say you did Star Wars, you could probably retire
Yeah.
after that.
Yeah.
But yeah, Star Wars was a big breakthrough. And when I was thinking about it for the show, I watched the despecialized version, and we can talk about that whole problem with Lucas changing the film over time. But the despecialized version is a sort of an amateur version that's been done where the guy, I think he goes by the name
Hammy. Yeah.
something
Something
like
like
that.
that. Yeah.
And he's not for profit, just for preservation of the original film. He's pieced together from different VHS versions, laser
Laser
discs,
discs. Yeah.
he's pieced together the original version of Star Wars from 1977 without all the additions and without all the edits and things. And it's for me, it was a great breakthrough because all these years since I saw the movie in the theater, it's always been disappointing to see the changes that he's made.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, we can talk about that more
Yeah.
later. But sitting down to watch it this time, what struck me is what a really well-made film it is.
Oh yeah. Well, I got questions about that too. So
It's just loaded with stuff.
yeah.
Most science fiction movies prior to that point, if they pulled off one good effect, if they had one decent-looking alien or one decent-looking robot, you would go, "Oh, bravo!" The fucking film is just brimming with stuff. I made a list of all the little things that I guess you could call amusing but unnecessary. The little things that were put in there that really make the film, in a way, creates that sense that you're in a real world, but really weren't necessary. The sort of things that probably the studio people were saying, you don't need to do that.
How much did that cost?
It's not like the same phenomenon that Ridley Scott had with Alien, where they were
Yeah.
saying you don't really need this, it's too much. But like, for instance, the animated chess pieces. And when Chewbacca and C-3PO are sitting inside the Millennium Falcon and they're playing chess, and they have these little stop motion animated creatures, each one a different design. And I stop and think about the effort and the time and the money that went into doing something that's just blink and you miss it. But those are the things that won over guys in the audience like me, because I was a big Ray Harryhausen fan by that time, or the first time I saw Star Wars. And the idea that they would go to that level of that trouble and that level of attention to detail was extraordinary to me.
Yeah, not only doing stop motion animation, filming them separately, and then putting them on the film as holograms.
Right. Even the idea itself.
Yeah.
The idea that Lucas was savvy enough to know about this type of material, to know that if you're going to do something like a chess set, it has to be made fantastic in some way. It has to be like an eyeball kick.
Yeah.
It can't just be like traditional chess pieces that they're moving around. But the head of the garbage disposal creature, that's a very fun sequence when they fall into the garbage disposal, and some sort of creature is floating around under the water, and it grabs Luke and pulls him down. But before it does that, its head pops up and it looks around and goes down. And that's, again, it's completely unnecessary. They didn't need to do it, but they added that, and that just makes the whole thing so much more exciting and so much richer. This is the famous one, the creatures in the cantina.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I can't tell you what a reaction that scene got when that played. When folks saw that for the first time, it's just like, this is unbelievable. Because usually, like I say, if you got one monster like that in a movie, it was an amazing thing. There's so many you can't even count them. Now it turns out a lot of those were just like Halloween masks and things like that. But still, to have all of that in one place and to have that level of detail to the scene, that amount of color in the scene, is really remarkable, and it helps make the film, what it is. I think the legs of the alien that pass by the camera in one shot. It's when I guess the spy is ratting out Han and Obi-Wan and Luke, and there's an outside shot of the building that the Millennium Falcon is in, and there are people passing by, and then you see like the shadow of two giant legs, some sort of creature walks in front. Again, not necessary, but it adds to the thing. All the robots in the sand crawler, when C-3PO finally is reunited with R2, and they're in that inside the sandcrawler, and they see all the other different types of robots. Not necessary. They didn't need to do that, but it just makes the thing, really exciting and wonderful to watch.
Yeah, it fills up the background, makes it organic.
Right? The dewbacks, the creatures those things that you see, the lizard-like creatures that they're riding, the stormtroopers are riding at some point. You see them parked outside the cantina. Again, for most productions, that would be the highlight of the movie. And here it is. It's just like a throwaway thing. The training orb, we talked about the training orb that Luke was using to learn how to lightsaber. And the land speeder. Not just the one, I mean, the whole idea of them adding to the list of special effects by having his land speeder float off the ground.
Yeah.
Think to yourself, most people, the first thing they would do when coming up with a budget is say, no, just put fucking wheels on it.
Yeah.
But they do the land speeder. And not only that, but there's a scene fairly early on when R2-D2 has gone off on his own, and Luke comes back to his garage, I guess it's supposed to be, and C-3PO jumps up from behind.
Jumps up.
He says he must have gone mad or something, and then they go out looking for R2. But the thing he's hiding behind is like a sports car version of a land speeder.
Yeah.
It's never seen again in the movie. The fact that they would do that is just extraordinary to me, to put that much effort into it. Most productions, even if they wanted to have a land speeder in that shot, they would just use the land speeder.
The same one, yeah.
Right? So all the little things like that, it's just sort of like an endless list when you start looking at it, all the details that really make this so rich. And it's one of the reasons I think why Ridley Scott, we talked about Alien recently, Ridley Scott had cited Star Wars as something that sort of was influential on him when he was doing Alien.
Yeah, having just watched Alien for last episode and then watching this, a lot of the corridors when they're like going to the prison cell, like when they're going to Princess Leia's cell, that reminded me of Alien a little bit.
Yeah. Well,
not as gross and wet, but just the tightness of it and the way it was shaped and was all black. It was
Yeah, there's definitely some similarities in the sets, but that the overall the attention to detail and the insistence on getting as much detail into every shot as possible, that's something that you can definitely see Ridley Scott doing in Alien, and it's something that he's doing here. Also, it's a very well-edited film. They won the Oscar that year. It was the three people that won the Oscar: Marshall Lucas and Chu and what's the other guy's name? Anyway, they won the Oscar for Best Editing. And that's the thing I always forget. When I go for a period of time without watching this movie, I always forget how fast-paced it is, how precise it is, with the editing.
Yeah, when I was watching it today, I was like, because I watched the despecialized. I was like, man, it's just moving along, because if you've never seen the special editions that he fixed, he adds all these scenes of like the land speeder, like going by 5 times, and every ship has to pass by 5. And I'm like, it slows it down.
Yeah.
But then I was watching a documentary that you told me about the
lost version. The original edit.
Yeah. And I was like, I can kind of see where his special edition came from. He's trying to put back all this stuff that he originally cut out. And I'm sitting there thinking, do we owe, is Brian De Palma, do we give him credit for the fixing of this movie because of how bad it was?
Well, a lot of people, I have seen videos online where the folks say, he's the guy that saved Star Wars.
Yeah.
I don't think I can go that far. I mean, every director, I assume, knows that you have a 3-hour cut of the film.
Right.
That's going to have to be chopped down. And presumably he went to people like Spielberg and Brian De Palma to get their advice on what needed to go. And he certainly got good advice, because many of the changes. But these folks that he brought in for the sort of second edit of the film, they are the folks that really seem to have honed the thing down so that the shots are so quick. It doesn't feel disorienting at all. It just feels full of energy, And it also gives the feeling that the storyteller knows where he's going with this. There's nothing extraneous. It's not like he's not sure, when you're watching it, you're not sure what these details, how they relate to the story. No, you always know exactly where you are. And I love the way he sort of can get rid of certain characters when they would be in the way, and then brings them back in, like the whole scene inside the Death Star, the way that C-3PO and R2 are in a different place, so we don't have to have them clanking
Clank
behind,
around, yeah.
um, and there's a lot of little touches like that, where, like for instance, early in the film when Lucas first gotten the R2D2, he tells C-3PO in his little jibber jabber, he tells him that if they want to see the whole message, they should take the restraining bolt off because it's short circuiting his system. Well, actually, it's a trick, right?
Yeah.
Because he wants the restraining bolt taken off so he can take off in the next thing. That's they're laying the next step of the story. They're putting in the little things that will take you on in the next scene and will explain where you're going in the next scene. And that really shows a lot of, smarts and craftsmanship in the storytelling. I have to say, I don't really understand where all that went with the second film.
Yeah, I know.
And with all the films that he's done since, I have a feeling that what it is with George Lucas is that for Star Wars and for Raiders of the Lost Ark, he had this big pile of ideas.
Oh, yeah.
And he put them all into those one movie.
One movie, yeah.
And when the time came to do Empire Strikes Back, he still had a few remaining good ideas, like Yoda and the Imperial Walkers and things like that. And maybe if you want to really give him the benefit of the doubt, you could say even in Return of the Jedi, there's a few interesting original ideas that he can get in there. But Star Wars is filled with ideas, the first film.
Yeah.
And then as the films go along, they get slower, they get more ponderous, and they don't have as many of those really great crackerjack ideas that he had in Star Wars.
Yeah, when I watched it today, I was like, man, I would love to watch this again without the knowledge of who Darth Vader really is and all that.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? It's a more fun movie when you're not bogged down with, oh, he's Luke's father and he used to be, he used to be Anakin and and all that. I was just like, I would love to watch it for the first time again.
Yeah, well, I remember that experience, and I remember how exhilarating it was. And even at the time, I remember thinking as I was leaving the theater, how are they ever going to do a sequel to this? How are they ever going to beat this? And I figured that what they would do would be what the James Bond films did, which was just to repeat the same story. But I think that probably what happened was Lucas was surprised that people took this so seriously. I think he meant it to be fun. He meant it to be sort of an homage to the matinee serials, Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers and that sort of thing. And when it came out, it was such a sensation. There were like news stories of people talking about their autistic children that had never spoken before until they saw Star Wars. And now they're talking a mile a minute, and parents would be sort of pushing their children at the shopping mall to be able to touch the cloak of Darth Vader as he passed by. And Lucas must have thought, well, if it's going to get that sort of reaction, if people are going to take it that seriously, if they're going to be talking about the Force and things like this, as if they are really fully thought out philosophies, then he has to make it, the second film deeper, more profound. And of course, he ended up hanging out with that Joseph Campbell guy, the Power of Myth guy. And a lot of his ideas are interesting. If you're interested in mythology, it's interesting to see his thoughts on the different types of myths and the fact that so many things that turn up in myths seem to be universal. They turn up in mythology in all sorts of cultures. And it probably, if you want to stretch a point, you could say that most of the more successful Hollywood films are working those myths. They integrate elements of that mythology in their stories, but usually it's done, I won't say unintentionally, but unconsciously. That stuff is just part of our culture. So we naturally, and this is the beauty of the first film, we just immediately accept it because we're so familiar with these tropes, with these ideas. We don't have to think about whether or not a young guy from the farm looking for adventure in the big city would want to rescue a beautiful woman. He said, of course he would.
Yeah.
And so you don't have to worry about character motivation. It just sort of falls into place. But I believe that the simple message in the first film is really, to me, far more profound than any of the stuff that's in the subsequent films. Because the first film, to me, is about trust yourself,
Yep.
right? When Obi-Wan is saying, use the Force, Luke, he's not saying use the Force. He's
Yeah.
saying, turn off the fucking computer and use your own intuition. You're pure of heart, you have integrity, and you have enthusiasm, and you don't need the computer. In a way, it's similar to the message of 2001, right? Because that's the height of action in 2001 is when they finally turned the damn computer off. So that message and the idea that the Force is not something supernatural, it isn't really a religion or an actual force. It's the force that's in all of us, that enthusiasm, optimism, and a desire to do the right thing. That's the religion, right? And as long as you trust yourself, then everything will work out fine. Well, that seems like a pretty good message, particularly for something that really is just meant to be entertainment, right? There's nothing harmful in that message, certainly. And it's something that everybody can pretty much agree with, right? There's not very many people who say, oh, no, you shouldn't trust yourself.
Yeah.
But the subsequent stuff, it gets very murky and unclear, and it starts to become, the Force, the Jedis, start to become like an actual cult or religion. And that doesn't appeal to me at all. And Luke goes from being this sort of innocent, wide-eyed kid to being a fucking priest in Return of the Jedi. He even got the Roman collar.
Yeah.
That's not the direction I would have taken it in, But
every time I think back about the first movie, I'm like, the Luke character has this really great character arc, right? From when we first meet him to where he ends up.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's that one scene in the middle after his uncle and aunt are killed, where he immediately just, okay, I'm ready, I'm go, because just before that he was, I can't go, I've got to do farm work. They're dead. Now he's like, all right, I'm ready to go. I'm gonna go be. Does that feel forced to you whenever?
Well, it did. Their deaths did remove the major impediment for him joining the adventure. I mean, he was essentially saying, when Obi-Wan is telling him, "You must learn the Force," he's saying, "I can't do it. Like Uncle, whatever his name is, it's not Uncle Ben.
No.
I forget the guy's name.
Uncle Owen.
Uncle Owen, is that it?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll take your word for it. I should know by now.
Yeah, no.
But his main thing seems to be, I have obligations here. I have obligations to these people, right? So he can't go off on an adventure. So I suppose, assuming that he's not just motivated by revenge to get the people that killed his aunt and uncle,
right?
He is. It's simply the only direction he can go in, right? What else would he do?
I know, but just I don't know. Maybe it's the way it's filmed. I don't know. It's just I can't do it, and then all of a sudden it's like, yes, I want to go be a Jedi like my father. I'm like, oh, that was quick. It just always seems weird to me for some reason.
Well, I think you probably would agree though that shot of the burning corpses, the burning skeletons, that's pretty powerful.
Oh yeah.
So there's emotion there, and I guess we could say maybe the story is a little too expeditious in that instance, but there is still, conceivably, if you ponder it, there is some good reason for him to want to go off. I don't know if I would want to go off and become a Jedi Master, but I would certainly want to go off and fight the Empire.
Right.
So, but that's the other aspect of it, is it is an entertainment, and the idea is to sort of move the story along. So you could say a couple of times, and I have heard people say this, that they don't really sweat over the dead bodies that they're leaving behind too much, right? I mean, he's pretty much fully recovered by the time they go looking for
by the time we get them all sizely, he's pretty much over it, yeah.
And when the planet that's blown up by the Death Star, when they discover that planet has been destroyed, there's not much thought given to it by anybody, as far as I can see. But then on the other hand, how much can you do? Right?
Yeah.
The reason perhaps why the movies that followed were less entertaining, in my opinion, is because they did feel a need to go into all that
to dwell on stuff, yeah.
Right? And I don't think that's the mission of a movie like this. I think the idea is move it along.
Move fun, yep.
And when you stop and think about it, there are a lot of surprisingly moving moments in the film. I know I've heard a lot of people over the years talk about how they remember that scene of Luke staring at the two suns with that music playing.
Oh yeah.
That touches people, the spirit of adventure, the desire to get away from the domestic life that's holding you back, right?
John Williams score.
Always an
Yeah.
important factor, right? His music makes everything work, I guess, for this and for Superman and for a lot of the other movies that we've been speaking about. When Leah gives him a kiss before they jump over that whatever that is.
Yeah.
That always gets a reaction. Anytime I've seen it with an audience, that always gets a reaction. And it is kind of it's an emotional moment. I won't say it's moving necessarily, but anything that makes you smile,
Right. Yeah.
that is a kind of movement. When he turns off the targeting computer, as we were just talking about, this is kind of hard not to feel, a little bit of a lump when you see somebody facing that sort of situation and they're willing to put the targeting computer aside and just trust themselves to be able to do it. And when it actually works, that's even more emotional. When Han Solo returns, that's an emotional scene.
Oh yeah.
I don't know. When I saw it with the first time I saw it with that audience, they went nuts when that happened, and that's another example of how they can, he was able to sort of plant the seed for something that pays off later, right? Have Han be a dick, and then he redeems himself at the last moment. Another example of planting the seed is having that moment where R2-D2 is hit by the shot, I guess, from Darth Vader's. They do that not only because they want to have that little joke where C-3PO says that he wants to donate his gears and certain, but also when they're all receiving their award, when R2-D2 comes walking out onto the stage, the audience loves that. That's, I guess, the equivalent of like the cat in Alien.
Yeah, don't kill the cat. Yeah.
You want to feel that the director or the filmmaker is paying attention to these little characters, these little side characters that the audience has affection for. I mean, I remember when I saw the film the first time, that scene where C-3PO gets thrown back when the sand people jump up and attack Luke, and him and Obi-Wan find, first they find the arm.
The arm, yeah.
And when the audience saw the arm, they thought, oh, you could hear that in the audience. Like, oh, poor C-3PO. They didn't even know who he was at that point. I mean, it's just, so all those little touches, and of course the final award ceremony. A lot of people have talked about how that's similar to the Nazi propaganda film, Triumph of the Will. But I don't really think that I mean, he may have been visually influenced to some extent, but the truth of the matter is that's sort of a curtain call for the characters.
Yeah.
Getting an award at the end is, it can't help but be touched by that, and it just leaves all the audience members leaving the theater with a smile on their face because they feel they've seen something that is positive and lighthearted and fun.
And then they go home and wonder why Chewbacca didn't get a medal.
Is he still grousing about that?
Probably.
I thought didn't he get a medal in one of the more recent Star Wars movies? Here's your fucking medal.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's all those little details. I think are what really makes the movie work. It's so nice to see a film where, and this was true of Spielberg's films as well from around that period, where you really get the feeling that the director is ahead of you. He's already anticipated what you want to see, and you're not going to be disappointed. You're not going to have sort of a flat, bland presentation. It's rich with stuff, and that makes it work.
Yeah. Now I know you're a fan of American Graffiti.
Yeah.
Now, do you think that? Because I always thought that he's a better writer than he is a director. Do you feel that way? Do you think he's a?
Well, I think the direction in both American Graffiti and Star Wars is pretty darn good, actually. He shows considerable skill, I think, as a director. But I think what happened with him is that well, first, as I say, he may have used up all his good ideas,
Yeah.
but he also may have lost his interest in doing these types of
Well, I
stories.
know the first one almost killed him. Really.
That's
I
what he
mean, like
said.
he,
Yeah,
yeah.
but by the time he is getting around to doing the prequels, which is some time later, right?
Oh yeah.
I mean, it was like a 10-year distance between Return of the Jedi and the Phantom Menace. I don't know if his heart was really in it.
Yeah.
When you watch those
And
document,
he hadn't really directed anything in between, right?
well, he did Tucker, and he did.
Okay,
I
yeah.
think he did Tucker. I think he directed that. I don't think he directed Howard the Duck. Did he?
No, I think he just produced it.
Yeah. Well, lucky him.
Yeah.
Doesn't have that on his resume. Well, he does, but maybe not at
Rocketeer?
this.
Was he involved in the Rocketeer? Why is that coming to my head? I don't know.
Well, ILM probably did the special
Yeah,
effects, right?
probably.
But that's the other aspect of it, is that Lucas, even if he hasn't directed all the films that he has been involved with, he has to be put down as one of the great, most important forces in,
Oh yeah.
no pun intended, other than maybe Walt Disney. I can't think of anybody who's had a more
No.
profound effect.
ILM, Skywalker Sound, THX, and I'm pretty sure now was he the first director to use like animated pre I know he used World War II footage, but that was like kind of the first pre-visualization move, like ways
Well,
for when
it,
when they to show his animators and hey, this is what I want.
it probably was not commonly used, and
Right.
I can't imagine that there were many films that needed it as much as the first
Yeah.
Star Wars film. So yeah, probably all those things. Not to mention the Dykstra Flex camera, which was the camera system that they used for the special effects, which I guess was, something that had been on the drawing board or had different versions over the years, but it really was. This was the first time that was used, and I remember being a special effects fan. I remember when I saw the film, it did strike me right away that they were doing so much with the camera in those special effects scenes that you normally would not be able to do. Even Stanley Kubrick couldn't do them.
Yeah.
I mean, in 2001, everything is rock solid.
Yeah.
The ships never pass in front of the planet because they didn't have the ability to do that, and the cameras always stay pretty much static, and there's no movement. And if there is movement, it's something very simple like a slight pan or zoom in, nothing terribly complex. So with Star Wars, they got stuff
Oh
flying
yeah.
all over the place, and the I was listening to a talk that John Dykstra gave. John Dykstra, incidentally, if for those that don't know, he's the guy that was sort of heading up the special effects department for Star Wars. He was somebody that worked with Douglas Trumbull. He did have some involvement with 2001, and Lucas asked Trumbull to do Star Wars. He wasn't available, so he recommended Dykstra. And apparently, at some point, either before the end of production on Star Wars or before the beginning of production on Empire Strikes Back, they had some sort of falling out, and so he didn't participate in any other films. But he did win the Oscar for Star Wars,
Right. Yeah.
and he's still working to this day, as far as I know.
He
In
brought what?
various,
Dennis Muren was brought on, or was he on the?
well, I
Was
don't
he brought in
know.
on the second one?
I think that Dykstra had established a big team, and I guess everybody else just continued. If Dykstra left before the end of Star Wars, first of all, it seems Lucas and him have decided not to discuss that
Yeah.
publicly because you can't find any real clear information about what exactly happened that resulted in him not working on Empire. But it looks like after Star Wars, Lucas was trying to put together a team of people that would be more under his control and folks that would be available to work on all the subsequent movies. You have to remember, Lucas was talking at that time about maybe doing 9 movies. So he wanted something that would be repeatable, and he wanted people that he could have under his control. Apparently, that was one of the problems, was that while Dykstra was doing some of the special effects work, Lucas was actually out shooting the film,
Right.
and they had communications problems. And I guess Lucas was unhappy with the way certain things went when he got back. Anyway, whatever the story was, we may never know. But I have to say, I think that Dykstra's special effects on the first film are superior to the special effects on the
Oh
second
yeah.
and third film. There's a crispness and a dynamic quality to the special effects that you don't see in the Empire. Empire is kind of some of the stuff is kind of touch and go.
Oh yeah.
One of the things that always bothered me was the matte boxes around the TIE fighters in some of the scenes. I don't know if you've ever noticed that. It's something you only will notice if the contrast on the print that you're watching, or if you're watching it on TV, if the contrast is too low, you'll start to
You'll
notice
see it.
there's
Yeah.
boxes around the ships. And what
Yeah.
it
Do you
is,
notice that? And on Hoth, whenever they have their anytime you're looking at from the inside of a ship, I guess to get rid of the matte lines, they had to lower the opacity so you can almost see through the cockpit.
uh,
Anytime they're flying over snow, you kind of notice those.
yes, I think I remember seeing that. Yeah, it's not. I mean, there are some very impressive special effects in Empire Strikes Back, but what seemed strange to me when I saw it the first time is they seem to have taken a little bit of a step back on the special effects that the first one had
First
done
one
so
had,
well.
yeah.
Like some of the coloring and the grain on the ships is wrong. They're very grainy, which looks like that means that they went through multiple passes, and doing the compositing work. And they also were often discolored. They were like bluish, or, they didn't really look the sort of bright white ships that you saw in the first film. Uh, anyway, whatever it was, I assume it was part of the sort of teething process when he was putting together this new team of people that were trying to develop techniques that were going to be repeatable for all the subsequent movies.
Right, yeah.
And by the time they got to Return of the Jedi, I think it's fair to say that most of the special effects were pretty impressive. Just not quite as dynamic as the first film, I think. Maybe that's just because that was the first film I saw and I loved it so much that,
Yeah.
but Dykstra has to be, that the development of that camera, certainly for a while, or that camera system, computerized camera system, that for a while there, that was pretty important in movies and TV shows that used, spaceship shots or anything like that. For a while there, it seemed like every movie and TV show around had some spaceships flying
Yeah.
around it. Buck Rogers and Battlestar Galactica, which I think actually was a Dykstra effort. So that was important. And yeah, so Lucas has a lot of things that he's responsible for, in the same way that Disney sort of set off a bunch of things that still remain important to the industry. I think Lucas, his company, developed the software that eventually became Photoshop. So
Oh yeah, yeah.
that's kind of extraordinary all by itself, right? That he was involved. And I'm not sure, but I think he might have also had something to do with the creation of Pixar. I think some of the early development of that approach to computer animation was
I
done.
believe so, yeah. Because
So
I think ILM started. I think their first big thing was Young Sherlock Holmes. When they
was it?
done that was like the first the guy made out of like a stained glass window.
Right,
I think that was like the first like a fully CGI thing.
right. Yes, yes. Uh, and ILM actually eventually became like the go-to company for doing spaceship special effects. I know I've always felt that the effects in Star Trek II were superior to the effects in the first one.
Yeah.
I know everybody talks about how beautiful the effects were in the first one, but basically there's just the pans on, the Enterprise and some strange blue light that you can't really see anything, can't see any detail in. But in the second one, there's all sorts of very dynamic, exciting stuff, and the ships look great. I don't think when they're going through like the nebula, at Antares Nebula or whatever the fuck it
Yeah.
is, that was really beautifully done. It's a wonderful piece of filmmaking. So ILM eventually got their shit together, and they did some amazing stuff in the years afterwards. But I still think the first film had the best effects. That's
Oh
my
yeah.
favorite.
And I definitely want to talk about sound design.
Yes.
What's his name? Ben Bird, is that his name?
Ben Burt. Yes. Yeah.
I mean, the stuff he came up with, for the lightsabers, for the ships, and the laser blasts, just
And all the creatures and the
all the
robots.
creatures. Yeah.
No, that's another example of how that sort of detailing, putting more layers and layers of extra stuff that you really didn't need, right?
Right,
And
yeah.
most people wouldn't have bothered. They did bother, and the result is something that I think it's still probably one of the highest grossing films of all time. It's certainly in the top five, adjusted for inflation. So that's the reaction of the audience for once all over the world really is entirely justified because it's a wonderful film and a wonderful piece of filmmaking. But what else? How can we criticize
I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, other than what I've already said about Luke's little, turn of attitude real quick, I really can't think of anything else bad about this movie, to be honest with you.
Well, I remember the first time I saw it, I have to admit that there was a twinge of concern when I first saw R2 and C3PO.
Right.
Because I thought, oh my Christ, the comical robots again. And then when C3PO starts talking like Dr. Smith, I thought, wow, this is not a good sign. But fortunately, they realized that comic relief is fine, but you don't spend all your time with
Time
them.
with him, yeah.
There are other people, other characters that give the story the gravity that it needs to make it interesting and make it emotionally involving. But that probably is a curse that Lucas has faced a few times in the years since. He just makes it a little too silly, a little too childish.
Yeah.
Jar Jar Binks.
Jar Jar Binks, the Ewoks.
Yes, Ewoks, another example, yeah. And I guess that's because when he was doing the first Star Wars film, he wasn't really sure exactly what the audience would be. I'm sure he didn't say, I want to do this just for children.
Just for children, yeah.
But by the time he was doing Return of the Jedi, I think, and certainly by the time he was doing Phantom Menace, he did seem to be saying that these are movies for children, essentially, which I think is probably there's so many contradictions in the man,
Yeah.
But to have movies like Phantom Menace, which is all about a bunch of guys in robes talking to each other about grain embargoes or whatever.
Yeah.
That is not the sort of thing that you would say could possibly be done with children in mind, right?
Right, yeah.
And yet at the same time, he's saying these films are essentially made for children.
For children, right.
So,
no, which, I mean, it's just like with the first one, it's like, oh, it's for children, but then we're going to cut people's arms off and show a bloody limb on the floor. It's like, I doubt you were making this for kids.
Did you see in the original version that
this was been a head?
He cut his head off.
Yeah.
So I'm glad they changed that. But yeah, I mean, you see that also in Lucas's insistence on changing who shot first, making it Greedo shoots first, which doesn't work really, It doesn't make any sense. And also it's questionable from as far as I'm concerned whether the ethics that he's trying to put forward there makes sense. Yeah. Somebody is holding a gun on you and saying they're getting ready to kill you, and you shoot them first and save your life.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah.
Why should you feel guilty about that?
I don't know. I don't know. I guess it's. I mean, I remember when I first started hearing about it, it was, I guess, where Han Solo became such a likable character. He didn't want him to be that bad, where he would just kill somebody. I'm like, well, I mean, he's defending himself. To be honest with you, that's what he's doing. So.
But also the power of the character and the emotional effect that it has, his arc, is lost if you make him a nice guy all the time.
All the time, right? Yeah.
It's only because we question whether or not he's a good guy. During most of the film, it's like, well, he's good to have around. As she says, he certainly is brave, but is some question as to what he's in this for. Apparently he says openly that he's only interested in
the money. And you figure like at any time he could turn on him and turn him in. You know what I'm saying?
Right. And the fact that there's that question, and then in the end he does the right thing and saves the day, that's powerful. That works. That makes you feel good. If you take away all the question and he's just a nice guy all through it, then there's no place to go with that character, right? You got to have him be a bad guy a little bit, right? And I understand from looking at that work print that he in the cantina scene, he's actually sitting there with a girl. I don't know.
The girl,
a hooker or something that he was chatting with. So they're all little details, which I guess is a good thing that they got rid of. Apparently, there was a girl in the scene when Luke goes to, what do they call it, Tashi Station?
Tashi Station, yeah. There
Yes.
was a lot, yeah, a lot more characters there, and I'm kind of glad they cut them all out.
Yeah, me too.
Works
Especially,
better. It works better with a smaller
yes.
cast.
Well, especially when you hear the dialogue
Yeah.
between them. But there was a girl there. I don't know if the idea was that she was like going to become Luke's girlfriend, but all of that is
It's gone,
unnecessary.
yeah.
Thank goodness they didn't, somebody talk sense to them and cut all that shit out. But it would be interesting, and it is interesting to see what remains of that, version of that print. But and I suppose probably I have to admit I've never read the novelization.
I have
never,
no idea. Yeah, I
never
haven't
brought
either.
myself to that. But I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of that stuff is
Is
in
in there.
yeah. But which is another good reason not to read it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a wonderful film because simplicity in something like this is important. The simplicity of the story and the directness of the story, coupled with the level of complexity and sophistication and the special effects and the sets and the costumes,
Yeah, I was gonna
that's
say
what makes it work.
it's like a big movie in the sets and in the just you're in the vastness of space and you got the Empire, but then you were just following this small group of people with
Right.
that contrast. It makes it work.
And it's certainly, for my taste, this is the sort of space adventure that I would like to see because
Yeah.
I'm a simple man. I'm a steak and potatoes kind of guy. A film like Dune, either version really, Lynch's version or the new version, I just couldn't bring myself to sit through it, because it just seems like, and it may be a wonderful film. I'm not criticizing because I haven't seen it,
Yeah.
but just the idea of watching something like that just fills me with dread. I
Yeah.
can feel myself drifting off just thinking about it.
Well, I remember when I seen Phantom Menace in the theater, and I was excited because it was a new Star Wars.
Right.
And you have the opening crawl, and it's like, you're like, yay, and then the dialogue starts, and you're just like, oh my God, what is going on here? It's just like this, they're just going on and on about trade blocks and Federation, and I'm just like, what he's gone the wrong direction already.
Well, also I mean, one guesses that having those three editors working on the first film, that they were able to get the film away from him a little bit so that it doesn't show his worst inclinations. Whereas by the time he was doing the prequels, I don't think anybody could say no to him.
Yeah, it was
So
whatever he wanted.
right, even if he had an editor, a credited editor on the film, it probably was all his decision as to what was going to go in. So all the stuff that might have ended up on the cutting room floor with the other editors ends up in
Yeah.
the film. I thought it was terribly boring. I actually fell asleep when I saw Phantom Menace, which really startled me.
There's just little things in it that I like. Out of the new obviously the Darth Maul character is really cool. uh the Duel of Fates, that's like the best theme song I've heard in a score for a long time. And I thought the Obi-Wan character was really good, played by Ewan McGregor. That's
In
pretty
the
much it.
prequels.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all I really like about the Phantom Menace.
Well, I mean, one of the things about the first film was that you had this sort of division of labor. The young people gave you sort of the youthful energy and a sort of contemporary feel. They spoke and thought and acted like young people in the 70s.
Yeah.
Right. And you had, on the other hand, you had all of these sort of British actors like Peter Cushing and Alec Guinness, and all those other Brits that you see in the
Yeah.
different roles. And they were doing sort of like the heavy lifting, right? All that sort of dialogue that it seems to be very easy for British actors, but it was very difficult for American actors for some reason. They can say that stuff convincingly. So you have those two groups, and together it works. Together it feels. In the prequels, you seem constantly stuck with these people that are speaking in this sort of faux Shakespearean style. It just is, it's off-putting. There's nothing there that's like, and occasionally when they throw in, almost as a joke, they throw in something that is recognizably contemporary to our time. and it just seems like it stands out. It doesn't work. It doesn't fit into that world that they've created.
Yeah, I was watching another little special, and it was they were talking to Mark Hamill about the dialogue, about how it was just too much. He said, "I can't read this." He's like, "You can write this, but it's hard to say it."
He said, "You can type this shit, but
Like,
you
yeah,
can't
you
say it."
can't,
Right?
yeah. So I think the Phantom Menace, I think he's finally doing what he wanted to do in the first one,
Probably
which
so.
is have all this Shakespearean
Right.
dialogue.
And also, I mean, the first film, he had to actually convince people to make this.
Yeah,
So he probably went through many drafts, and there was probably a lot of input from different people. By the time he was doing the prequels, conceivably he could do one draft.
do whatever
Right?
you want to.
It's done, folks. Let's
Yep.
start shooting. But I mean, you look at the first film. Basically, what it is, it's this very optimistic thing, uh, innocence in the form of a naive farm boy, somebody who's unsophisticated, unexperienced, raring for adventure, right? And pure of heart. He has no desire to make money or to
Right. Yeah.
hurt anybody. And he goes off to the big city. I guess you could call first the cantina,
Yeah.
and then later the Death Star. That's the big city, right? It's this big gray place where there's all sorts of strange creatures, and he has a great adventure. And the innocent farm boy, the sort of what's a good term for a rube,
There you go. Yeah.
right? The person that everybody, all those city slickers are thinking, hey, he's the guy that saves the
Saves it.
world,
Yeah.
right? Right? Now that's a wonderful message that you can come from nowhere, and as long as you are true to yourself and you have a pure heart, you might actually end up saving the world. I don't know what the message is with Empire or Return or any of the prequels. What are they trying to tell us? That if we all put on robes and sort of skulk around, what is the end? See, this is the problem with these
Yeah.
stories.
Well, you got to
There's a
remember
whole,
in the prequels, he also changed it to where you had to have like a high midichlorian count to even be a Jedi, so it couldn't be just anybody.
right, right. And I know when the first film came out, there were a lot of people who criticized it as bad science fiction. And I remember Harlan Ellison, who I'm on record as saying I think was a dick,
Yeah.
saying words to the effect that it is science fiction, it's bad science fiction, because George Lucas was trying to say, oh, it isn't really meant to be science fiction.
Yeah, it's science fantasy.
Right. He's right, actually. It obviously is not meant to be hard science fiction.
Yeah.
But getting into an argument about that seems kind of pointless to me. You know, at the end of the day, he made something that was really wonderful, and part of it that was wonderful was that it felt like a rare thing. This isn't going to happen again. Enjoy it, because
Yeah.
this is it. But it's true of all great movies when you stop and think about them. They can't be replicated endlessly. It's one great thing. And the reason why it's great is because it is one thing.
Yeah.
If it's something that can be done 1,000 times, then of course it's not going to be as entertaining or as moving as it was the first time.
Yeah, and once you try to start rationalizing lightsabers and saying that it's bad science fiction, that's you've
Yeah.
lost right there.
And the funny thing with Harlan Ellison, not to go off on a long thing about Harlan Ellison, but here's a guy who was working, I don't know, 40 years, 50 years, and everybody seemed to think he was a literary genius. He wrote a lot of impressive stuff, you know, a lot of great science fiction. But he had as much opportunity to come up with something like Star Wars, if he wanted to make his fortune, or to come up with something that he would consider good science fiction that people would be excited about. And it never, you know, he wrote a lot of short stories. I don't think he ever wrote any novels. And of the stuff that he was involved with as far as film and television, usually it was him suing people for taking his ideas from Outer Limits episodes that he did, rather than coming up with stuff that actually gets turned into compelling drama on television or in the movies. And he would be probably the first to criticize somebody like Gene Roddenberry. Gene Roddenberry is an easy punching bag for most people who are men of letters. But Gene Roddenberry, just by writing the one script for the first episode of Star Trek, The Cage, as far as I'm concerned, that's as good as
Yeah.
anything that Hall and Ellison ever managed to get made on television. And Gene Roddenberry is from what Hall and Ellison says about him, he's basically a clock. Well, how did that clock write such a brilliant thing? As a matter of fact, with The Cage, they didn't use that. They didn't broadcast that as the pilot, but they used it as part of a two-parter later in the series of the original Star Trek. And when he wrote the script for the two-parter, which incorporated The Cage, that was great too.
Oh yeah.
So, he may have been a clock and maybe he never did anything worthwhile after Star Trek, but you got to give the devil his due.
Yeah, Star Trek is still on the air, and we're the only two people still talking about Harlan Ellison.
Right. Well, Hall and Ellison, I think, was angry because probably for most of the people on the planet, the only reason they know him at all is because he wrote the original script for City on the Edge of Forever.
Yeah.
And he didn't even have the good grace to accept the praise for that. He would always say, "Oh, they ruined it. It's not my script," and blah blah blah. Holy smokes! Well, anyway, maybe we should do an episode about Hall and Ellison.
I know we can do that.
Yeah. And I used to be a great fan of his, so it goes to show you how you can change your opinion of people. I'm not changing my opinion of his writing, but as a person, he was a bit of a louse.
Yeah. Now I know they filmed this movie in London, but it just seems weird that all the bad people are played by British. So it's almost like he's saying all British people are evil.
Well, I guess I think that it was pretty international. I mean, they shot a lot of that stuff in the Death Star. That was all done in studios in England, but they were also in Tunisia and a bunch of other places. But yeah, I think probably he supposedly based his idea about the space battles on World War II movies. And in the World War II movies, if you remember, the Brits always played the Nazis.
Yeah.
I mean, they had British characters, of course, but if they had German characters, very often they'd be played by Brits doing, the Nazi, the German accent. So maybe that was what carried over. But just the fact that they were around, they were shooting those scenes in England. So I guess it was easy to pick from they got a pretty good collection of actors.
Yeah.
So that worked out. I was always sort of surprised and disappointed that Alec Guinness, who I love, I think he's a terrific actor, and I loved him even before he did Star Wars. So
right.
It's not, but the fact that he was, he sort of said some negative things about the script, similar to the things that Harrison Ford and Mark Hamill might have said.
Yeah.
He said, the script, the dialogue was appalling.
Yeah.
Which sort of reminded me of the sort of things that Peter Cushing, Christopher Lee used to say about their scripts for the Dracula movies.
Right.
But the funny thing is that movie is probably the most quoted film in the past 50 years. So if the dialogue was so bad, how is it that we keep repeating it?
Repeating, yeah.
I mean, I don't know about you, but I can't go through a day without hearing somebody use a line from Star Wars.
Yeah, I think I've seen an interview with him where he said that he had seen American Graffiti, and that was the only reason that's the only reason he even read the script.
Right.
But then once he opened it and realized it was science fiction, I guess he was kind of turned off, but he still read it.
Right. Yeah, him, he probably, like a lot of people at that time, saw science fiction as kind of a disreputable genre, which is not surprising. I mean, let's face it, there weren't too many very good science fiction movies. 2001 was pretty much it. 2001 and Forbidden Planet. And then what else you got? That's about it. Right?
That was it, yeah.
So I can understand his reservations, but you would think that when the movie comes out and it becomes this sensation of all time, you would think he would say, well, I must have been wrong about that. I must have missed something. Because it's possible, too, that he maybe the version of the script that he read was,
not what we see now.
Right.
Yeah.
It might have been extensively edited. So there are a few lines where you can see where the acting is really making the line work.
Yeah.
Who is the fool? The fool or the fool who follows?
Yeah.
It's only because Alec Guinness is saying that it works.
It works, yeah.
So, but he was lucky. He got two guys who really knew how to play that type of character. You got Alec Guinness and Peter Cushing. Peter Cushing is
Oh yeah,
terrific.
Peter Cushing's great in this movie.
And the fact that this ended up, I guess, being his next to last movie,
I
close
think
to
so.
it,
Yeah.
that's nice that he was able to go out on such a high note, to be able to, after all those years of making movies that were kind of looked down on, probably looked down on by people like Alec Guinness,
Yeah.
to make a movie where he's on pretty much equal billing with Alec Guinness, and
Yeah.
it's also the most popular film of all time.
And
That
if I
was
remember correctly, he didn't wear shoes while filming or wore
That's
flip
right.
flops or something.
Well, they said that he said that they were unable to get his size shoes because they were rushed with the costuming, I guess,
Right.
and the shoes that they gave him were too tight. So he asked Lucas if he could wear like slippers, fuzzy slippers,
Yeah.
perhaps, to make it a more amusing story. When the camera wasn't on his feet, when he wasn't doing long shots,
Yeah.
which is most of his.
Most of us, yeah.
I think there's maybe one or two shots where you can actually see his boots, but the boots did end up in the Moff Talking figure. So this is one of the few remaining pieces of Star
Star
Wars
Wars.
stuff that I have remaining. This, I think, they overdid it with the firearms. I don't
Yeah.
remember him carrying around
Yeah.
so much firepower.
Now, see, they should do an alternate version where he has the slippers on.
I think somebody actually suggested that. I don't
Yeah.
know if anybody ever did it, but that would be kind of cute. Yeah.
Yeah, this is the only original piece I had. This is like a C3PO.
Oh, that's cool.
This is
Yeah.
like original.
That's
Everything else I got here is like newer stuff. It's not,
and I,
nothing.
and I see you have is that the Blu-ray of Star Wars?
Yes, the Blu-ray trilogy. I was gonna get the bigger, the one that has the prequels in it, but I was like, I really don't need those. So
Yeah.
I just got the
Well,
3-pack there.
let me show you what I got. This is the first time they released it on VHS.
Nice.
And when I read in the trade papers that it was coming out on VHS, because I was the first kid on my block to have a VHS player.
Later, right?
So I rushed off with my wallet filled with cash into Manhattan, and I went from one electronic store to the other saying, I want to buy Star Wars. And they all looked at me like, I just come from another planet, which I guess is appropriate.
Oh, yeah.
None of them had it. It turns out that it was released through the video rental library. 20th Century Fox didn't want to issue this as a sell-through. This was something that hadn't sunk in to me at the time because I had already bought some movies on VHS. I bought Alien and I bought a couple of James Bond movies. So I figured that every time they put out a movie, it's for sale to the
You're
public.
gonna get it, yeah.
But that's not what they wanted. They weren't really crazy about VHS to begin with. They didn't want the movies to be put out on VHS because they thought it would cut into their box office. So when they started to put them out finally, they put them out at very expensive releases with the idea that it would only sell to rental stores.
Yeah.
So that's what this was. This actually, just to show how crazy it was, the thing isn't, well, you can still see it, I guess. You see that?
Yep.
They actually put like a little stamp on it so they could follow the tapes. They would know.
Yeah.
I don't know if that is actually encoded in the film itself on the tape. I don't know if they had the ability to do that back at that time, but they put a little license stamp on it, like you're buying liquor or something.
Yeah.
But that, I don't know if this has any value, but it's interesting to see how, I guess it's a sign of how fucking old I am.
Yeah.
First release before they even started to think about renting these or selling these things. And I guess it was Indiana Jones, The Raiders of the Lost Ark. I think that was the first one where they said, put it out for $20 and let everybody buy it. And then it became a big revenue source for Hollywood.
So that was the one, that was like, you bought that. That was the copy that you bought?
The guy, I finally came across an electronics store. The guy was closing. And I just poked my head and I said, you have Star Wars? And he did have it. And I said, well, how much? He said, $100. So he was selling me his rental copy. And he probably made a decent profit out because I don't think they charged him $100. But that was probably the suggested retail price. And usually when they sell to dealers, the dealer pays the wholesale price. So a store would pay half of that. So he probably
Yeah.
paid 50 and I got it for 100. But boy, this was a treasured item in
Oh
my
yeah.
collection for years.
Does it still work, or have you
Yes, it
watched it
does.
recently? All right.
It does. Amazingly, all the people that said that VHS tapes would fall apart after still works fine, you know. So, I mean, the tracking is a little iffy at times, but that
Right.
was
Yeah.
always true. You know, the VHS
You
was
get a
not that
brand new
great.
tape at the time and have the fixture
That's
tracking on
right.
it.
Yes,
Yeah.
probably was the same thing.
I
But
remember renting a video, and it would say before the movie started on the screen, it would say adjust your tracking.
right, yes,
Have bars that you had to line up.
they were so afraid that people would assume that something is wrong with the tape and take it back
Take it back,
to,
yeah.
so they start to do that right at the beginning of the tape. For a while there, some of the VHS machines used to have a little message that would come up on the screen
Hmm.
that would say tracking problem or tracking,
Yeah.
if there was some sort of tracking issue, which I always thought made it worse.
Yeah.
A little noise from the tracking problem. Now you got this big sign on the screen saying check your tracking or whatever. Anyway, but Star Wars was a wonderful film, and I guess it's just an example of how if somebody really has a feel for the material, which George Lucas obviously had a love for this stuff, he had a knowledge of it and a love for it. And when you have somebody like that in charge, and they're really willing to go to the point where they're actually risking their health,
Yeah.
to get the thing done right, you can end up with something that changed movies and changed lives, because it certainly changed my life. I mean, I love Alien and I love 2001, and there's a lot of other movies that I love from that period.
Yeah.
Star Wars really was the one that I guess I felt, the greatest attraction to. It really felt like, the world was opening up, a whole new world of cinema and entertainment.
Yeah. Now,
I,
now, of all the films that we've talked about from this time, do you think that this one had the bigger change on Hollywood, more than Alien, or more than I don't can't remember what else we've talked about from that
well,
same
Jaws and The
Jaws?
Exorcist
Yeah.
and Alien and Blade Runner, all of those films had tremendous impact. But I can't imagine anybody really claiming that anything had more impact than Star Wars, because they're still trying to put out something. It's just like the James Bond series, all these years after James Bond's initial success, even when the movies aren't, they cost much more than they used to, and they don't really make as much as they used to. They're still making sequels, and other people are still trying to come up with something that would be like that would enjoy
Yeah.
the same success. And that's true of Star Wars too. They're still putting out new Star Wars movies. They're more expensive. They're not as good. They're not as universally loved. Some of them are despised, as far as I can see, but they keep making them, and others keep trying to get something similar. When you stop and think about it, all the fantasy films all the fantasy franchises that everybody likes so much, they're all, they probably wouldn't exist, or they wouldn't exist in the form that they're in if it hadn't been for Star Wars.
Yeah. I mean, not just Star Wars wise. I'm talking about, like, we talked about ILM. I mean, that's pretty much other movies are made because they were able to do what he done on Star Wars. Uh, his marketing, the way that he knew ahead of time, hey, toys,
Yes.
I'm gonna tell Fox I want all of the, and of course at the time Fox was like, toys, whatever, take it, we don't
Right.
care. But now it's like, he changed all that. You know what I'm saying?
Well, it's interesting.
There
You
was
read
no
that.
Jaws action figures.
Well, there was some Jaws merchandise, but
Yeah,
it's true that particularly 20th Century Fox, I think, because didn't they do Dr. Doolittle? You read that book that
yeah, yeah.
Dr. Doolittle had a big merchandising aspect. And I even remember as a kid seeing Dr. Doolittle toys, the llama or whatever the
Hmm.
fuck that's and it was a bust. They lost a ton of money. They lost a ton of money on the movie, but they lost a ton of money on the merchandise, because who wants to buy a fucking toy from a movie they never watched, right? So 20th Century Fox was very disinterested in merchandising by that point.
Yeah.
And of course, Star Wars was not recognized even by the people who were working on it. It was not recognized as something that would be such a game changer, right? I mean, Lucas talks and other people have talked about, I wouldn't say disrespect, but the sort of not completely supportive attitude that some of the British crew had.
Yeah.
You know, I think they were right around the same time in one of the other studios. They're working on Jabberwocky, the Terry Gilliam's film. I don't know if you've ever seen that. That's the first film he did after Monty
After
Python and
Monty
the Holy
Python,
Grail.
yeah.
And that's a fun film. I enjoy that. Wasn't a great success. Matter of fact, I think you could probably say it was a box office failure. But it seems that the people that were working at the time, they felt that Jabberwocky was the one that was the important film.
Yeah.
And Star Wars, they seem to have the attitude that this was some sort of crazy thing that this kooky guy Lucas had come up with, and you know, I don't know why it wasn't apparent that that was going to be something special. It seems to me just like with Alien, all you had to do is look at the dailies. All you had to do is look at the sets. And you have to say, Jesus Christ, we've never seen anything like this before, right? This is going to be fantastic. That's the attitude I had when I saw them. I think we started talking about me seeing the trailer on Channel 9.
Yeah.
I guess it was the opening weekend or the day, a couple of days before the opening weekend. And just to see all that stuff. And of course, the trailer is just a little, I don't know, it's a minute and a half. Suddenly you're seeing all things just the way it should be. And you say,
Right.
why couldn't they have been doing this all along? You know, why is it? But to see it that way was just such a startling thing. And because we didn't know anything about it, then there was no advance word about Star
No.
Wars. It just suddenly fucking Star Wars appears. And go into school the next day and everybody said, did you see that trailer? You know, I don't think we called them trailer. We called them commercials.
Commercials, yeah.
But everybody was talking about that because they just couldn't believe it. You know, where did that come from? You know, so it's hard for me to believe that these people who are experienced movie people could see all of that stuff as it was being done and not recognize that it was going to be something special. But apparently, some of them missed it. I don't know why.
Yeah. Yeah, it was so big that I guess the toys they couldn't make them fast enough, so you
Right.
just had to buy the empty box
Right.
with
Yeah,
a coupon to
they
smell.
gave
Yeah,
right, like vouchers.
yeah,
Can you imagine as a kid getting a voucher in his Christmas stocking?
yeah,
But yeah, they couldn't make them fast enough. Yeah. So I guess that they learned a lesson there. And I imagine probably what happened as a result of Star Wars, there was a bunch of other shitty movies that had merchandising deals that flooded the market with their
oh yeah.
toys. And nobody bought them. So they were all probably, cursing George Lucas for that.
Yep. Toys, video. I still remember video games on the like Atari 2600, which was the first gaming system that I had. So that was of course, I mean there was other movies that had games, but that just stands out to me. And then I mean just like when you think about everything else you think about the movies and we mentioned the Ewoks TV movie and the Christmas special that nobody talks about.
Yeah.
But all of the books, like I don't even know how many books
Yeah.
that are no longer canon now since since he sold it, but there were so many books of like side stories and
Right.
I mean it was just huge.
Well, it struck a chord with young people. I guess you could conceivably say that Star Wars was like the first young adult series.
Yeah.
The books had the same effect on people, young people. It gave them an opportunity to escape from the miserable world that they were living in.
Yeah.
And it gave them the opportunity to dream that they could be a hero, which is something that I think is irresistible to a young person. You like to think that you could be just like Luke Skywalker. You could end up, you don't have to really change that much outwardly, but you just have to summon up the courage to be yourself. So that's the sort of message that I think probably affected a lot of young people. And since the movies were coming out very infrequently, the only thing they could turn to would be the books or
Cartoons.
right, or the soundtrack album. I must have played the LP to pieces. I still remember the smell of the LP.
Yeah.
Because there's this very glossy, beautiful album that they put out with all sorts of photos and things. And it had a very distinct, I don't know if it was the ink or the paper or whatever, but that was all part of the experience.
Yeah. No, I don't have it anymore, but I remember it was pretty big back when it came out, but it was the soundtrack, but it was all disco.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and I don't think I have it anymore. I used to have that.
Well, if I remember correctly, when I bought the album, it came with a 45 inside that had the disco
The
version.
disco
I
version.
think that that's the way they did it. I don't think they actually put it on the record itself because they had two records, if I remember correctly. It was like I don't know what they call it, a gatefold thing with the
Yeah.
two records. And I think they slipped in the 45 as a little extra if you wanted to disco dance
Yeah,
to.
because I remember it was the main theme, and then it was the cantina
Right.
music that was somebody had took and turned it disco music.
Well, I guess the cantina music pretty much could go as
Yeah,
disco
yeah.
music, just as it was. But yeah, for a while there, it seemed that every time they would talk about Star Wars on TV news or anything, they would always play the disco version of the music.
Yeah.
Which must have been kind of
Don't know why.
disconcerting. Well, I guess they figured it was catchy and it's trying to
Yeah.
catch two fads at once, right? The disco music and Star Wars.
Star Wars, yeah.
But it's funny when you think about it, Star Wars really doesn't feel like it came from that period.
It does not, no.
It's an odd thing. About the only thing that really possibly you could say is has that sort of 70s feel is the haircuts, the hairstyles.
Yeah.
But at least on the men, on Princess Leia, I don't think anybody
Yeah.
back in the 70s was going for that.
Maybe her not wearing a bra was
What was she
could
not?
have been, yeah, no.
Oh, well, that's interesting.
I think
I,
that was a George Lucas thing. He told her she couldn't wear one because I guess he thinks that in that universe they wouldn't even have invented bras or something. I can't remember the whole story behind it, but yeah, she's not wearing one.
well, it's interesting that he thought that far into this
Into
into this mess. Yeah.
the
But I always thought that Princess Leia was supposed to be Jane Fonda. I don't mean actually getting the actress to play the
actress,
part,
right? Just
but I think she, because I remember when I saw it, it seemed like everybody sort of naturally accepted her personality.
yeah,
And her personality was, almost like the Helen Reddy song, I Am Woman, Hear Me Roar.
yeah. Yeah, she wasn't. She definitely wasn't the damsel in distress.
Right, not a passive character at all.
That's what we think she's going to be until they get
Right.
there and get her out, and then she takes over the show.
Right. She's and because I know Lucas, he worked a little bit on Apocalypse Now. I think he did
Mhm.
one draft of that's what eventually became Apocalypse Now, and he was interested in the Vietnam War because he lived through that time, and he might have come close to being drafted. I don't
Yeah,
know, but he worked his ideas about the Vietnam War into Return of the Jedi, obviously with the Ewoks representing sort of primitive people that are defeating the empire, the mechanized military machine.
right.
They're able to beat it to death with sticks and things like that. Uh, so that is on his mind, and I thought, well, possibly he looked to Jane Fonda as a model for Princess Leia because she fills a similar role. In the first film, assuming we forget everything about the sequels and the other stuff that's been done about these characters since, all the retrofitting of ideas.
Yeah,
The first film, we don't really know what she's the princess of. We don't really know where she fits in the power structure, but presumably she's the princess on some planet, and that planet is under threat or under the control of the Empire. But if she's a princess, then that means that she's royalty, right?
right. Yeah,
And she is going against, she's becoming a rebel. She's a member of royalty, but she's also a rebel. And that really was sort of the position that Jane Fonda had. She came from Hollywood royalty. Henry Fonda was one of the biggest movie stars in Hollywood. And yet she became this sort of radical left-wing anti-war figure. So I have a feeling that that's where he got the idea from. And I have a feeling that it's because she was so similar to Fonda that the audience was immediately able to pick up on how they should react to it. They knew exactly what she represented in the film. But it's actually that's perhaps one of the few aspects of Star Wars that you could say has a sort of subversive quality to it, that it's about defeating the Empire. Well, the only empire that really was existing at the time, the only unquestionable empire, was the United States.
yeah.
Right? So in a way, you're talking about rebels against an entity that is sort of like the United States. That's the sort of attitude, I guess, that wouldn't be surprising back at that period, and from somebody who who went through the '60s and went through the Vietnam War and through Richard Nixon's time in office and assassinations and all that. There was a very jaundiced view of the United States. Not like now.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know if he designed. I don't guess he designed a lot of stuff. I'm sure he had input. I guess Dennis, what's his name? Who's the guy who done the paintings that sold it?
Oh, Macquarie.
Yeah. I'm sure he came up with a lot of the designs. But every time I look at, Darth Vader, his helmet, and all the helmets, it's basically SS warrior soldiers from like World War II, is what I get out of it.
The
You know what I'm
helmet,
saying?
yes,
Yeah,
the
the
helmet.
helmet definitely. Yeah, but the way they dressed, the way they're all gray. And, what I'm saying?
Right.
It sort of always reminded me of was German soldiers.
Yes, he definitely is going for that
Yeah.
as well. That's the safer reference, right?
Yeah.
Making your villains into Nazis, that's always easy. You can get away with that.
Yeah.
Uh, I would also say, as far as Darth Vader, that if Lucas was a comic book reader, and I assume he was,
hmm
Darth Vader looks an awful lot like Doctor Doom.
Yeah.
I mean, the only difference really is that Doctor Doom has a cowl, the cloak up over his head,
Yeah.
rather than a helmet, but otherwise it's essentially the same. And even in terms of the way the character behaves and speaks and his philosophy, it's definitely Doctor Doom. But we also talked many eons ago about my feeling that Christopher Lee's Dracula was also an influence,
Yeah.
because they were there in England working with many of the same people that worked on Hammer Films, Peter Cushing, David Prowse. He wanted to have Christopher Lee involved, but Christopher Lee was too busy doing some shitty piece of garbage.
Yeah.
So he basically had David Prowse move and act the way Christopher Lee's Dracula did, including his tendency to always be throttling people.
Yeah.
And then they got, I guess, David Prowse's voice, as you could hear from that rough cut of the movie, or that work print, wasn't quite what he was looking for. So he got James Earl Jones to give him the sort of booming quality that sounded something like Christopher Lee.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Even though we've seen the footage with Prowse's voice, you just can't imagine any other
Yeah,
voice in a finished product. What
right.
we saw was a rough cut, which I wanted to ask you about because whenever they were showing all that footage, it was in black and white. Now,
Right.
did they just get that printed that way? Because obviously they didn't film this stuff in black and white, right?
No, I assume they made a black and white copy to do
Okay.
the rough cut in, and I don't imagine they would bother to go to the expense of having the thing turned out in color to do
Right.
that
Yeah.
sort of work. They're just putting sort of a rough assemblage of the footage to see what sort of work needs to be done. I imagine, in a way, and I'm speaking through my hat because obviously I wasn't there at the time.
Yeah.
I don't know the routine, but I would guess that you have to be careful when you're doing the first cut. I'm speaking from my experience on my films to a certain
Yeah.
extent. It's very easy to think that you got it right because you put the certain music over it.
Yeah.
And you don't you have to put. Sometimes what I would do when I just finished re-editing my first film, and what I would do is I'd turn off the sound just to see how the scenes flowed, because if the sound is on, there's a good chance you're going to miss some mistake or some problem, continuity problem,
Yeah.
or a cable hanging in the background or something like that. So I would say getting a black and white print and getting black and white, getting the footage in black and white and using that to make your first cut of the movie is a good idea, because you're going to be focusing entirely on the story. You're
Yeah.
not going to be fussing about whether the colors are right or anything like that.
I thought maybe it was cheaper and probably faster to get black and white film developed. Maybe they could.
Probably so, yeah,
Yeah.
probably so. It's an interesting thing to see, and I don't know. I assume that work print or whatever it is to a certain extent somebody's attempt to reconstruct it. I don't think we're
Yeah.
seeing the actual work. They got all this footage from different sources over the years, like some of the DVD releases or some of the
Yeah,
documentaries that
behind
were
the
done.
scenes stuff, and I
Right.
guess some of the footage was actually used in the Christmas special and
Yes, yes.
some
Yeah.
of the other things that actually put
Oh
that
God, the
footage out.
Christmas special. Oh
Yeah,
my God.
I'm glad I didn't watch that when it first come on.
Well, I
I
wish I
didn't
could
I
say
didn't
that.
see it till years later, so I wasn't like excited. Oh yeah, it's coming on TV. Let me go watch it.
Well, it was a great source of embarrassment to me because I practically lived at the movie theater
Yeah.
when Star Wars came out. I was there every weekend. I don't know how many times I saw it the first summer that it was out. And my parents were always saying, "Why are you going to see that movie again?" I said, "Oh, you can't, it's so
It's
great. You
yeah.
can't wait." And so when I saw that they were going to have a special for the holiday, I thought, "Oh, this is going to be wonderful. I can show my parents what a great thing
Yeah,
Star
they'll see
Wars
what I'm
is."
talking about.
And they must have just thought I was a complete simpleton. You know, that thing was playing on the TV, and we were all just sort of sitting there staring. What the fuck is this shit? You know,
Now, was that a studio thing, or did I mean Lucas really didn't want to do that, did he? Was
he
that like a
licensed it. He was
well,
the
no, but he didn't want
person.
to. It wasn't his idea, right?
Well, I think the script was. See, the problem was nobody knew Star Wars was going to be what it
The
became.
big, yeah,
Right. So they thought we'll have a little fun with it. So yes, he should have probably paid more attention to the script. I guess one of the guys that wrote the script was the guy that I don't know if you know the fellow. He's got the sort of blonde wig and the purple glasses. A big fat guy. He
oh
writes
yeah. He
writes
was
the
on the Hollywood Squares all the time.
yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, I know you're talking about, but I
He,
can't think of his
he
name.
replaced Paul Lynn after Paul
Yeah,
Lynn. Uh, he writes. I think his big gig is writing the jokes for the Oscar telecast.
yeah,
So why they would think that somebody like that, and he is a funny guy, you know, when you
yeah.
get him at his best, he can be quite entertaining, but not the right guy to write a Star Wars
He
thing, you
probably
know.
never even seen the movie.
Might not have. I don't know. I don't get the impression they did a documentary about that horrible
Yeah,
special. It's on YouTube, and I don't get the impression listening to him that he really had any particular knowledge.
knowledge of it. Yeah,
It's just like it was a job. And why would you pick people like B. Arthur? Excuse me, B. Arthur, Harvey Korman. I
yeah,
mean, these aren't the people that you get for a Star Wars thing, right? But they were thinking in terms of the traditional type of variety shows that run on TV around
TV. Yeah,
holidays. But boy, is it terrible.
yeah.
And,
The stuff they did on the Muppets was a lot better.
yes. Well, Jim Henson was sort of in the same league as somebody like George Lucas, you know, and I think that probably the success of Star Wars spurred him to try more ambitious things. That's why he
Yeah,
eventually ended up doing things like the Dark Crystal, which has a sort of Star Wars quality to it. But yeah, that's special. I watched it fairly recently after seeing Red Letter Media talking about it.
uh-huh.
And I thought, well, let me go back and see. Could it possibly be as bad as I remember? Oh boy, it was. About the only thing that's worthwhile in it, they have a little animated segment with Boba Fett.
Boba Fett. Yeah,
That's the only thing that really is worth anything.
I think
So
that's other than him being in the Droids cartoon. I guess that's what gave him his popularity.
I guess so, yeah. I had never been a big fan of Boba Fett, to be honest with you. As a matter of fact, I remember when I was watching Empire Strikes Back, there was a point in Empire Strikes Back, and I may have said this before. There was a point in that film where, as I was sitting there in the theater, I suddenly realized I wasn't interested in Star Wars anymore.
Yeah,
It was that scene where Darth Vader was instructing the bounty hunters. And for the first time, you're looking at a scene playing out where everybody on screen is wearing plastic buckets on their head.
yeah,
You know, I thought this is no longer, this isn't, these aren't the droids I'm looking for.
yeah.
You know, it's not the Star Wars I liked. I want to see human beings, and I want to see something that is more interesting and more involving emotionally than just cool looking, you know, robots or cool looking science fiction characters
Right.
with elaborate firearms. You know, it's sort of like when uh, Darth Maul came along, and they said, "Oh, he's got
Double-bladed lightsaber. Yeah.
Okay, good. It's make a nice toy."
Yeah.
And the later films, the optimism and the simplicity of the story and the sort of open-ended quality that it had, that we could imagine that this is an adventure that may go on. These people are going to go on to other great things, but we don't have to know about it. We just
Yeah.
enjoy this one adventure. And with the later movies, it's like just these constant lightsaber fights that go on and on and on, and all the obsession with the martial arts movies, trying to work in all sorts of martial arts moves and things like that.
Yeah.
And I just find it very tedious. It's not, there's nothing there, I mean, the problem with martial arts movies generally, maybe with the exception of the absolute best ones,
Yeah.
is that they are basically just exhibitions of martial arts skills. The storytelling is usually pretty bad.
Yeah.
And even as convincing fight scenes, they're usually not very impressive, right? You don't really believe that anybody's fighting. You're just impressed by the athleticism of the people on the screen. So to take that element and to put it into Star Wars just doesn't seem like a smart idea to me.